The Painted Smile Part 1, The Invitation. It was a chilly autumn evening when six old friends, craving an adventure, found themselves gathered at a small pub in their hometown. The night was young, the air crisp with the scent of fallen leaves, and laughter filled the air. Each of them had been in the same friend group since high school, but time had taken them in different directions. Some of them had moved away, others had married, but tonight was about rekindling their old bond. "Come on, we used to do crazy stuff all the time," Mark said, his voice filled with that familiar, mischievous tone that he always used when he was up to something. "Let's do something tonight. Let's go somewhere. A little different." "What did you have in mind?" Rachel asked, skeptical but intrigued. She had always been the most practical of the group, but she couldn't help the excitement that bubbled up as she remembered their wild past. "I heard about this old circus," Mark continued, leaning in closer. "It's abandoned now, but they say it's haunted. People have seen a clown there, never taking off his makeup." The mention of clowns made Sarah's stomach churn. She had always been afraid of them, and the thought of a ghostly clown sent a shiver down her spine. "Are you serious?" she asked, her voice shaky. "Oh, come on, it's probably just a rumor," Mark reassured her. "But imagine how awesome it would be to go check it out. We'll get a little scared, take some pictures, and call it a night. It's what we used to do, right?" "Why not?" said John, the most adventurous of the group. He leaned back in his chair, grinning. "We've survived worse." "All right," Rachel sighed, her curiosity getting the better of her. "Let's do it. But if anything weird happens, we're leaving." The group piled into two cars and drove out of town, heading toward the outskirts where the old circus was rumored to stand. The air grew colder the farther they went, and the city lights soon disappeared, leaving only the moonlit road ahead. The drive felt longer than it should have, and by the time they arrived at the site, a deep fog had rolled in, shrouding everything in an eerie mist. The circus lot was more dilapidated than they had imagined. What once might have been a place of wonder now stood as a haunting reminder of something lost. The entrance gate was half collapsed, with rusted metal bars hanging down like broken teeth. The tents were nothing more than tattered remnants, their vibrant colors now faded and swallowed by decay. "This is freaky," Rachel muttered, her eyes scanning the area nervously. "I don't like this." "We'll just take a quick walk around," Mark said, leading the group inside. The ground beneath their feet was soft and uneven, the remnants of the old circus rides and stands long abandoned. It felt like they had stepped into a place frozen in time, a place untouched by the world outside. As they ventured deeper into the grounds, they stumbled upon an old, rotting ticket booth. Inside, a few dusty papers fluttered in the wind. But the most disturbing thing was a collection of photographs pinned to the wall behind the counter. They were old black and white images, some yellowed with age, showing various circus performers. "What's with these?" Sarah asked, her eyes narrowing as she inspected them. "They look like circus performers," Mark said, shrugging. "Maybe they're from back when the place was open." Rachel stepped closer, her eyes drawn to one photograph in particular. It showed a clown, painted with a bright smile and hollow eyes, standing in front of a row of children. The children were smiling too, but there was something off about the way they looked. Unnatural, stiff, like they were forced to smile. The clown's smile, however, looked too wide, too forced, stretching unnaturally across his face. It made her uneasy. She stepped back. "This isn't right. This clown, there's something wrong with his smile." John grinned, trying to lighten the mood. "It's just a photo, Rachel. You're imagining things." But as they continued to look at the photos, they noticed that the clown appeared in several of them, each one with a progressively wider smile. The last photo made Rachel's breath catch in her throat. The clown was standing in front of a broken-down carnival ride, and his smile had become grotesque. His teeth were sharp, jagged like a predator's, and his eyes were no longer the soft, lifeless gaze of a photo, but something darker, more alive. Suddenly, the wind picked up, rattling the boards and sending a chill down their spines. "Let's get out of here," Sarah said, her voice trembling. But before they could turn to leave, they heard a sound, a soft, shuffling noise, followed by the faintest echo of laughter. The sound was unmistakable, a child's laugh, high-pitched and eerie. The friends froze. "What the hell was that?" Mark whispered.
The encounter. The air seemed to freeze around them. The laughter, high-pitched and unnervingly childlike, echoed in the corners of the dilapidated circus. Rachel's breath hitched, her body rigid with fear. Mark, always the brave one, was the first to take a step back, his face pale. The clown stood just a few yards away now, its eyes gleaming with an unnatural intensity. His painted smile stretched even wider as he tilted his head to one side, as though studying them like a puzzle. The wind seemed to quiet, leaving only the sound of his soft, rhythmic breathing. "Who are you?" Mark stammered, his voice cracking. He tried to sound confident, but there was no hiding the fear that crawled up his throat. The clown didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slowly raised one gloved hand to his face, the movement deliberate and unnervingly slow. He pressed his fingers against his painted cheeks and, with a sickening sound, pulled his smile even wider. The sound of cracking paint and flesh filled the air, and for a moment it felt like time stood still. The friends froze in place, their eyes wide in terror. The clown's mouth stretched impossibly, showing rows of sharp, yellowed teeth that seemed to go on forever. "You came to see the show," the clown said at last, his voice soft and soothing, but the words were laced with something darker. "But the show is for you now. Welcome to my world." Rachel's heart raced, her mind scrambling for an escape, but the ground beneath her felt like it was pulling her deeper into the earth. The clown's smile, too wide to be real, seemed to grow with each passing second, stretching further, showing a mouth full of jagged teeth. Without thinking, Rachel screamed, and that was the moment everything changed. The maze. The clown's head snapped back sharply, his smile never wavering, and then he lunged. The movement was so fast, so sudden, that Rachel had no time to react. The others shouted in panic and scattered in all directions, running blindly through the foggy ruins of the old circus. Rachel's heart pounded in her chest as she sprinted away, not sure where she was going. The fog made it hard to see, and the eerie silence was broken only by the frantic sound of her footsteps. Behind her, she heard the faint shuffle of the clown's movements, always just a little too close. The soft, mocking laughter following her like a shadow. "Don't run," the clown's voice echoed in the distance. "It only makes the game more fun." A sharp pain shot through her side, but she pushed through it, desperate to get away. She darted between broken carnival booths, dodging wreckage as the mist thickened. Her breath was shallow, her body aching, but she kept running. She had to. There was no other choice. She rounded a corner, nearly colliding with a decaying concession stand. The broken windows reflected her pale, terrified face. But it was then that she noticed something strange, something she hadn't seen before. In the glass of the window, a faint image of the clown appeared. His face was distorted, like a reflection in a cracked mirror, but his eyes were locked onto hers. Before she could react, she turned and found herself in a wide-open space. The ground beneath her was soft, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. She had somehow ended up back in the center of the circus, right where they had started. The cracked ticket booth loomed in front of her like a dark sentinel, but there was no sign of her friends. She called out, panic rising in her throat, but the only response was the distant sound of laughter. Click. Her eyes shot to the center of the lot, where a single figure stood, a twisted version of the clown, holding a large, old-fashioned camera. The clown's grin widened as he slowly clicked the shutter, capturing her fear in an instant. "You're part of the show now," the clown said, his voice low and distorted. "And shows must have an ending."
The truth behind the paint, as Rachel stumbled backward, she could feel her heart racing, each beat growing louder and faster in her ears. She glanced around frantically, hoping to find some kind of exit, some way to escape the nightmare. But all around her, the circus seemed to stretch on endlessly, like a maze with no way out. That was when she remembered something Mark had said earlier. The clown never took off his makeup. She had dismissed it as just part of the story, but now, standing here in the middle of the cursed grounds, she understood. The makeup wasn't just for the performance. It was part of the curse. The clown wasn't just a performer. He was a prisoner. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the lot, carrying with it the faintest sound, a whisper. Rachel turned around, heart pounding in her chest, and saw a figure emerging from the shadows. It was Mark, his face pale and wide-eyed. He looked disoriented, like he had been wandering in circles. "Rachel!" he shouted, his voice full of relief. "We need to get out of here. It's not what we thought. This place, this circus, it's alive." Rachel didn't need to ask what he meant. The moment she saw his face, she could tell something was wrong. Mark had always been the skeptic, the one who could explain away every horror they encountered. But now he was shaking, his eyes filled with terror. "What happened to the others?" Rachel asked urgently. They're gone," Mark replied, his voice shaking. "I don't know what happened, but they were taken. This place, it's not just abandoned, it's cursed." Rachel grabbed his arm, pulling him closer. "We need to leave, now. Whatever's going on here, we can't stay. This place..." She trailed off, her eyes scanning the surrounding fog. "It's too dangerous." Mark nodded, his expression grim. "The clown, he's not just a performer. He's the one who keeps everyone here. He traps them. The people in the photos, the ones who came here before us, they're still here, trapped." Rachel's heart sank. "What do we do?" "We have to break the curse," Mark said, his voice hoarse. "We have to find a way to make him stop, but we have to be quick." Suddenly, the clown's laughter echoed through the fog and the temperature dropped. The sound was so loud, so close, it felt like the air itself was vibrating. "Too late!" The clown's voice called out from the darkness, his tone mocking. "The show's already begun. You're part of it now." Rachel and Mark ran, their footsteps desperate, their minds racing. They had to find a way to escape, but every path they took only led them deeper into the heart of the circus. The fog thickened, the world around them distorting with every step they took. They reached the center of the lot, where the main stage once stood. But now, it was an altar, a place where the clown's victims were drawn into his world. The old props, the broken Ferris wheel, the remnants of carnival games, all seemed to bend toward the center, as though the circus itself was alive. And in the center stood the clown, waiting. His painted smile glowed in the dim light, his eyes dark and endless. "This is the end," the clown said softly, his voice echoing in the silent night. "The show has its final act, and you've already played your part." Rachel's heart raced as she looked around desperately. There was no way out. The circus had consumed them, just as it had consumed so many others before them. Mark's voice trembled as he stepped forward. "You don't have to do this. Let us go, please." The clown tilted his head and smiled. "It's not about what you want. It's about what I need." Without warning, he lunged at them, faster than before, his wide smile swallowing the darkness. The Clown at Hollow Creek, Part 1, The Legend of Hollow Creek. Hollow Creek was a small town nestled deep within the mountains. Few people passed through it, and fewer still stayed. It was the kind of place that was forgotten by most, a quiet speck on the map, overshadowed by larger cities. The town's residents were simple, hard-working folk, but there was an unsettling rumor that had persisted for generations. A story whispered only in hushed tones, especially when the fog rolled in thick from the woods, blanketing the town in its ghostly embrace. The story was about the clown. Every few decades, a carnival would mysteriously appear just outside the town. At first, it seemed like any other traveling show, full of lights, music, and the promise of escape from the dullness of everyday life. But those who dared to visit the carnival never came back the same. They either vanished entirely or returned with pale faces and haunted eyes, muttering about the clown and the dark magic that had taken hold of them. Over time, the carnival stopped appearing, and the clown's presence was nothing but a distant memory, relegated to the town's folklore. But for those who still lived there, the memory of the clown was like a dark shadow hanging over their lives, a reminder that some things were better left forgotten. And then, one autumn evening, a group of 6 friends, college students seeking adventure, arrived in Hollow Creek. They had heard the rumors, but they were eager to investigate. What was the harm in a little curiosity? They had traveled to small towns before, looking for ghost stories to pass the time, but this one felt different. As they approached Hollow Creek, the first sign of something strange appeared: the fog. "This is it, guys," Mark said, pulling the car over. He had always been the leader of their group, the one who pushed them to explore the unknown. His wide grin was infectious, and even though they all knew this might be a little out of their league, they trusted him. Rachel, the skeptic, was already easy. "Are you sure about this? I mean, it's a ghost story. You know how these things end." "Oh, come on, Rachel," John chimed in. "It's just an old legend. We'll check it out, take some pictures, and move on. What's the worst that could happen?" They all piled out of the car and began walking down the road that led toward the town center. The air was cold, and the fog wrapped around them, swallowing everything in its path. Hollow Creek seemed deserted. The few houses they passed were dark, their windows covered with thick curtains. The only sound was the crunch of their boots. As they made their way through the town, the mist grew heavy. It felt as though they were walking through a dream, or still to something they couldn't fully understand. John questioned their presence. "What's going on?" "According to the map, the carnival is just ahead," Mark said, his voice breaking the silence. "Let's see what this is." The group followed him. Their footsteps echoed eerily in the fog. Around the corner, first it looked like an old abandoned carnival. The entrance gate was rusted. Once vibrant tents now faded and tattered, their edges curling like the pages of an old book left too long to see. The Ferris wheel towered in the distance, its rusted frame creaking in the wind. The remnants of colorful banners fluttered weakly in the breeze. But the carnival was silent. It didn't look like it had been open for years, maybe decades. "This doesn't feel right," Sarah said, her voice a soft whisper. She looked around. "Come on, it's just an old circus," John said, grinning. "Nothing to be afraid of." Mark led the group through the broken gate and into the carnival grounds. The grass was overgrown, and the lights were still halfway. The air was thick with the scent of the hay. Yet, as they ventured further, they began to hear something. A faint sound, the soft whistling of a tune, drifting. "This is seriously creepy," Rachel muttered, her eyes scanning the dark shadows of the grounds. They reached what appeared to be a tent, but unlike the others, it wasn't completely collapsed. It stood like a silent sentinel. The fabric was torn in places, but still held some semblance of its former shape. The entrance flapped in the breeze. "We should go inside," Mark said, facing her. "Are you sure this is it?" Rachel asked, her anxiety rising. "Oh, come on. What's the worst that could happen?" Mark said, giving her a reassuring smile. The group entered the tent, and what they found inside chilled them to the core.
The Mirror of Madness, Part 1, The Inheritance. Claire had always thought that inheriting her Aunt Eleanor's mansion was a blessing. Her aunt, an eccentric woman who had lived alone for most of her life, had been known for her peculiarities. She had often sent Claire odd trinkets and strange letters, full of cryptic advice about dreams and the supernatural. But when Aunt Eleanor passed away unexpectedly, Claire had been too young to understand the full extent of her aunt's eccentricities. Now, at 23, Claire found herself standing in front of the grand mansion, a place she had only seen in photographs, wondering what secrets it might hold. The house sat on the edge of a sprawling forest, isolated from the nearby town. It was a grand, Victorian-style building with tall windows that seemed to watch the world. The paint was chipped and peeling, and the once beautiful garden had been overtaken by wild plants, giving the place an air of neglect. Still, there was something about it that drew Claire in. It was hers now, and the thought of exploring the house and uncovering the mysteries inside filled her with a mix of excitement and apprehension. Inside, the house was even more imposing. The high ceilings and long hallways seemed to stretch on forever, and the rooms were filled with old, dusty furniture. There was a certain heaviness in the air, as though the house itself had been holding on to memories it was unwilling to release. As Claire moved through the rooms, she noticed several strange objects. A collection of old dolls in one corner, a collection of books on obscure subjects, and, most curiously, an ornate mirror in the parlor. The mirror was tall and framed in gold, its surface gleaming despite the dust surrounding it. There was something unsettling about it, something Claire couldn't quite place. It stood in the far corner of the room, and though the house was old, the mirror seemed strangely untouched by time. It was beautiful, but it exuded a strange energy, one that made her feel uneasy. That mirror, a voice suddenly interrupted her thoughts. Claire turned to find Mrs. Harding, the housekeeper, standing in the doorway. Your aunt was very particular about it. She said it was special. She kept it covered when she wasn't using it. Claire felt a shiver run down her spine. What do you mean? It's just a mirror, right? Mrs. Harding's face grew pale. I don't know, Miss Claire, but your aunt, she always warned me not to look into it. She said it could show things that shouldn't be seen. Things? Claire repeated, raising an eyebrow. What kind of things? Mrs. Harding didn't respond immediately. She just looked at the mirror, her face full of apprehension. Your aunt never fully explained. She would only say that the mirror had a mind of its own, and when she was younger, she saw things in it that drove her to madness. I think that's why she kept it covered all these years. She didn't want anyone else to suffer like she did. Claire's curiosity grew, despite the sense of dread that had settled over her. Do you think it's true, that it can show things? I don't know, Miss Claire, but I wouldn't look into it if I were you, Mrs. Harding said softly, her voice filled with warning. Your aunt, she started to change when she spent too much time near that mirror, and before she passed, she begged me to tell you to stay away from it. Whatever you do, do not look into it. Claire was silent for a moment, her eyes fixed on the mirror. She felt the pull of it, as though it were calling to her, whispering her name in the stillness of the house. Thank you for the warning, Mrs. Harding, Claire said, her voice tight. But I'll decide for myself. Part 2. The Reflection. That evening, after Mrs. Harding had gone to bed, Claire sat alone in the parlor, the heavy silence of the house pressing in on her. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her, something hidden in the shadows of the mansion. Her mind kept returning to the mirror, and she couldn't help but feel an overwhelming need to look into it. Just a quick look, Claire muttered to herself, trying to reassure her racing thoughts. It's just a mirror, nothing to be afraid of. With slow, hesitant steps, Claire crossed the room toward the mirror. As she drew closer, she noticed the intricate carvings around the frame, delicate swirls of floral patterns that seemed to shift and change as she moved. The closer she got, the more her heart raced. There was something about the mirror that made her feel like she was standing on the edge of something dangerous, something she shouldn't be messing with. Claire reached out and touched the glass. It was cool to the touch, sending a small jolt through her fingertips. The surface seemed to ripple slightly, as though it were not quite solid. She took a deep breath and leaned in closer, her reflection starting to form in the glass. For a moment, all she saw was her own,
Part 3. The Descent into Madness. Claire's breath came in shallow, panicked gasps as she stumbled backward, her feet tangling in the carpet as she tried to tear her eyes away from the mirror. The clown's face seemed to mock her, its twisted grin growing wider with every passing second. She blinked rapidly, willing herself to wake up from what had to be a nightmare, but the reflection remained, just as real and terrifying as the room around her. "No," Claire whispered, her voice trembling as she tried to gather the courage to leave the parlor. She turned and bolted for the door, but as she passed the mirror, she couldn't resist glancing back. Her reflection was still there, but now it was no longer a mere copy of herself. The clown's face loomed larger, filling the entire surface of the glass. Its eyes, black voids, stared into her soul, as though it could see her deepest fears. Claire ran, her pulse pounding in her ears. She tore through the hallway, her footsteps echoing in the vast, empty house. Her mind raced with thoughts of what had just happened, what she had seen. She had to get away from the mirror, from whatever that thing was, but the unsettling feeling wouldn't leave her. Every step she took, she felt like the air was thick with something pressing against her. But when she reached her bedroom and closed the door, she realized the horror hadn't stopped. Her reflection wasn't just in the mirror, it was everywhere. The room seemed to twist, as though her very surroundings were warping under the weight of the mirror's power. The edges of the furniture blurred, and the shadows cast by the dim light seemed to grow longer, more distorted. The air itself felt oppressive, thick with a presence that wasn't her own. She could still hear the clown's laughter, low and mocking, reverberating in her skull. "You can't escape me," it whispered, its voice seeping into her thoughts like a poison. "No!" Claire gasped, clutching her head as if she could force the voice out. But the clown's laugh only grew louder, more insistent. She was losing control, slipping further into the grip of something that had been waiting for her. Suddenly, a knock at the door broke the tension. "Claire?" Mrs. Harding's voice called softly from the other side. "Are you all right? I thought I heard you running." Claire rushed to the door, desperate for anything to break the suffocating isolation she felt. She flung it open and found the housekeeper standing there, her expression filled with concern. I'm fine," Claire stammered, her voice unsteady. Just a bad dream, I think." But Mrs. Harding's eyes lingered on her, a look of suspicion crossing her features. "Miss Claire, I'm afraid I wasn't completely honest with you before. There's something more to that mirror, something much darker than I told you." Claire felt her chest tighten. "What do you mean?" The housekeeper glanced nervously around, as though making sure no one else was listening. "Your aunt, she wasn't the first. The mirror has been passed down through generations. Each owner has changed, gone mad or worse. I don't know what it is exactly, but your aunt was right to warn you. That mirror doesn't just show your reflection, it shows what you fear." Claire stared at her, heart pounding. "What are you talking about? What does it want from me?" Mrs. Harding sighed, a deep sadness in her eyes. "It doesn't just show your fear, it feeds on it. And once it has you, it doesn't let you go. Your aunt, she saw things. Saw things that weren't real, but they felt so real that she began to believe them. She was never the same after she looked into that mirror, and I fear you won't be either." Before Claire could respond, Mrs. Harding turned and hurried down the hallway, leaving her standing there in the cold silence of the house. The weight of the housekeeper's words settled heavily on her chest. Could it really be true? Was the mirror trying to make her go mad? Part 4. The hallucinations begin. The next few days were a blur. Claire could barely think straight, her mind constantly haunted by the clown's twisted smile, the voice that whispered from the depths of her consciousness. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw it. Every time she looked into the mirror, it seemed like the clown was waiting for her, watching her, always just a breath away. But the most disturbing thing wasn't the clown's smile. It was the way the hallucinations started to bleed into reality. At first, it was small things she could brush off. A shadow in the corner of her eye, a fleeting movement in the hallway, too quick to be anything real. But then the noises began. Late at night, she would hear footsteps following her through the house. She would turn, only to find nothing there. And sometimes, she would feel something tugging at her hair, as though someone were standing right behind her, their breath on her neck. And it wasn't just the house. Claire began seeing the clown in her dreams, in the corners of her vision when she was out walking in town. The image of the clown became a constant presence, lurking behind every reflection, waiting for her to turn and see it. One night, Claire found herself drawn back to the parlor, the mirror calling her like a siren's song. She told herself it was a mistake, that she shouldn't go near it again. But her feet moved of their own accord, carrying her back to the spot where it all began. As she stood before the mirror, the air felt thick, heavy, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Claire's reflection stared back at her, her pale face twisted with fear, but the clown's face quickly appeared beside hers, just as it had before. It grinned, its mouth stretching impossibly wide. "Did you think you could escape me?" the clown hissed, its voice now a low growl. Claire felt herself drawn toward the mirror, her eyes glued to the distorted reflection of herself and the clown. She couldn't look away. The reflection seemed to pulse with an eerie energy. And before she could understand what was happening, she felt her body lurch forward, as though something was pulling her into the glass. "No!" she screamed, fighting against the invisible force that was dragging her closer. But the clown's laugh rang out, a terrible sound that filled her head. The reflection of her own face began to warp, contorting in ways that no human face should. And as she reached out to stop herself, the clown's hands emerged from the glass, grabbing her arms, pulling her toward the depths of the mirror. The Laughing Clown of Morrow Street. Part 1. The carnival comes to town. It was a quiet, dreary Thursday afternoon when the carnival arrived in Morrow, a small, sleepy town nestled in the countryside. The town, with its cobblestone streets and quaint brick buildings, had seen little excitement in years. Most of the townspeople went about their business as usual, unbothered by the faint sound of music and the rattle of carnival rides in the distance. They didn't even blink when the carnival set up overnight on the edge of town. But Lily Thompson, a 16-year-old high school student, couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. She had heard the rumors. The carnival wasn't like any other. People who visited said it had an eerie, unsettling atmosphere, like it was trying too hard to be joyful. And more troubling still, there were whispers of strange occurrences, of people disappearing or coming back changed. Some even said they'd seen a clown there, one whose smile stretched so wide it could split a person's soul in two. Lily wasn't superstitious, but something about the carnival made her uneasy. She had passed by the grounds on her way home from school, and the sight of the tent's faded colors fluttering in the wind sent a shiver down her spine. The sound of children's laughter, which should have been a comforting noise, felt more like an omen. The carnival was too loud, too out of place. She wasn't the only one who felt this way. Her friends, Matt and Sophie, had also expressed their discomfort. "Why would they set up so suddenly?" Matt had asked, his brow furrowed in suspicion. "And why is it only here for a couple of days?" Sophie, ever the adventurer, had been insistent. "It's a carnival. We should go check it out tonight. We might never get another chance." Lily had agreed to go, albeit reluctantly. She didn't want to seem scared, but the nagging feeling wouldn't leave her. And besides, she told herself, there was no harm in seeing what all the fuss was about. So that evening after dinner, the three of them set out for the carnival, the cool air biting at their skin as they made their way down Morrow Street.
Part 2. The First Encounter. When they arrived at the carnival grounds, Lily felt an immediate wave of discomfort. The place was almost too quiet. The rides stood unmoving in the misty twilight, their colors faded under the dim light of the few scattered lanterns. There were no attendants at the ticket booths, no sounds of children running or shouting with excitement. It was as though the carnival was waiting for something. "Maybe it's closed for the night," Sophie said, her voice breaking the eerie silence. Lily shook her head, her eyes scanning the area. "I don't think so. Look, there's someone over there." At the far end of the grounds, near the carousel, a figure stood motionless, staring out into the distance. The person was wearing a brightly colored costume, a clown outfit, complete with an oversized red nose and white face paint. The clown wasn't moving. He was simply standing there, his back to them, as though waiting for them to come closer. "I don't like this," Lily muttered, her stomach twisting. "I have a bad feeling about this." Matt, trying to shake off his own unease, shrugged. "It's just a clown, Lily. Come on, it's a carnival. Let's see what else is here." The three of them moved cautiously toward the clown, who still hadn't moved. As they got closer, the clown suddenly turned around, and the moment his face came into view, Lily felt her heart stop. His smile was wide, too wide. It stretched across his face, a grotesque, mocking expression that seemed to mock the very idea of joy. His eyes, beneath the heavy white makeup, were dark, unnatural, almost as if they were hollow. His gaze locked onto Lily, and in that instant, she felt a chill crawl up her spine. "Welcome to the carnival," the clown said, his voice smooth and eerie, almost too perfect. It had an unnatural quality to it, like the words were spoken by someone who had forgotten how to sound human. Lily forced herself to speak, despite the icy grip of fear wrapping around her chest. Thanks. We were just..." But before she could finish, the clown raised one gloved finger to his lips. "Shh! You haven't seen anything yet." Lily's throat went dry. The clown's presence felt oppressive, as though the air around them had thickened, making it harder to breathe. Without another word, he turned and walked slowly toward the center of the carnival, his heavy boots echoing in the silence. "Let's go," Lily whispered to her friends. This is not normal." But Matt, always the bravest of the group, grabbed her arm. "We can't leave now. We came here to see the carnival. Let's at least check out the rides." Despite the sense of dread that clung to Lily, she nodded reluctantly. The clown's presence was unsettling, but maybe they were just overthinking it. After all, it was only a clown, right? They walked past the carousel, the eerie sound of a distorted lullaby playing faintly from the speakers. The horses, frozen in place, seemed to stare back at them with lifeless eyes. Further down the path, they passed the Ferris wheel, its rusted frame creaking in the wind. As they continued walking, Lily could feel the unease building again, but she refused to let it stop her. The carnival was just a carnival. Nothing more. Part 3. The Descent. Expanded. As the trio walked further into the carnival, a growing sense of dread settled heavily over Lily. The cheerful sounds that one might expect to hear at a fun fair, the lively chatter of children, the shrieks of thrill-seekers on the rides, the clinking of game booths, were all missing. In their place, there was an unnerving silence, broken only by the faint sound of a distorted carnival tune echoing from the Ferris wheel. The sound seemed warped, as if someone had intentionally messed with the mechanism, making the notes sound off-key and disjointed. The faint hum of the carousel added an extra layer of creepiness, its mechanical whirring low and constant, like the heartbeat of the carnival itself. The atmosphere was thick with tension, the air heavy and damp, the fog curling in around them, reducing visibility. The lights flickered sporadically, casting long shadows across the path. The few carnival games that stood like abandoned relics of a more lively time seemed to mock them with their emptiness. Not a soul could be seen tending the booths. No workers, no attendants, nothing. "We're the only ones here," Sophie whispered, her voice shaking slightly. She glanced around, her eyes darting nervously from the booths to the rides. "It feels like the whole carnival is watching us." Lily, feeling her stomach twist in discomfort, glanced over at Matt, who, although he was trying to act brave, looked unsettled. "Maybe we should just leave," she muttered, more to herself than to anyone else. "This doesn't feel right." Matt, ever the adventurer, gave a nervous chuckle, trying to shake off the unease. "It's just a carnival, guys. It's probably just for show. The whole town's been talking about it. Maybe they're just trying to make it seem spooky for some reason." But even as he spoke, his words didn't carry the same confident tone they once had. Just as they were about to move towards the exit, a voice rang out from the shadows, sudden and sharp. "You shouldn't be here." The three of them froze. It wasn't the voice of someone nearby, but it came from all directions at once, like it was emanating from the very ground beneath their feet. It was deep, smooth, and unnaturally calm. A voice that seemed to carry weight, as though it had lived 1,000 lifetimes. Lily spun around, searching for the source, but the carnival appeared even more desolate than before. No one was in sight. The mist had thickened around them, reducing their visibility to just a few feet ahead. The carnival grounds felt vast, empty, and somehow suffocating, as though that they had walked into a different world altogether. "Did you hear that?" Sophie asked in a hushed, trembling voice, her hand clutched tightly around Lily's arm. Matt, trying to appear unfazed, nodded, though there was an unmistakable flicker of fear in his eyes. "Yeah, but where's it coming from?" Before they could make sense of the situation, a figure appeared from the darkness ahead, stepping out of the shadows with an unnatural grace. The pale glow of the carnival lights illuminated his face, an unmistakable clown. His makeup was flawless, his skin white and smooth, with bright red lips that stretched in a wide, unsettling grin. His eyes, however, were hollow and empty, deep black pits that seemed to draw everything into them. There was something wrong about his gaze, something that made Lily's blood run cold. The clown stood motionless, watching them for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then, without warning, he spoke again, his voice smooth and melodic, but with a hint of something sinister underneath. "You came to the carnival, and now you'll see. But the carnival has a price. It always has a price." Lily took an instinctive step back, bumping into Sophie. Her heart was hammering in her chest as she looked desperately for an escape. But the clown seemed to be everywhere, his presence smothering everything around them. The faint laughter, twisted and deranged, seemed to come from all directions, a cacophony of sound that echoed in their ears. It was maddening. "No," Lily managed to whisper, shaking her head violently. "No, we're leaving." But the clown stepped forward, his heavy boots thudding loudly against the pavement, each step amplifying the tension in the air. There was no way to turn back now. The path behind them, which had seemed so clear a moment ago, was now lost in an endless fog. The laughter grew louder. "You can't leave," the clown said, his smile never wavering. "Not once you've seen the truth, not once you've crossed into the carnival's domain." Lily's breath hitched. "What do you want from us?" The clown tilted his head, his smile widening impossibly. It was as if the corners of his lips were stretching beyond what was humanly possible, the edges almost reaching his ears. His dark eyes gleamed with a twisted delight. "Nothing," the clown replied, his voice becoming softer, almost a whisper. "Nothing but your fear. It thrives on it. And now that you're here, you'll feed it with your soul. Each laugh you hear, each shadow you see, it's all part of the game." The ground beneath them seemed to tremble slightly, as if the entire carnival was alive, breathing, and waiting for something. "You don't know what you're messing with," Matt said, his voice unsteady as he took a step back. "We need to get out of here now." But the clown simply chuckled, the sound low and slow, like the winding of a sinister clock. "There's no leaving, boy, not once you've stepped inside." Suddenly, the ground beneath them shook more violently. The lights on the carnival rides flickered erratically, casting shadows that twisted unnaturally. A strange, otherworldly force seemed to grip the air itself, pulling the trio in all directions, as though the very atmosphere had turned hostile. It felt like the carnival was a living, breathing entity, one that was slowly closing in on them. "Leave now, and the carnival will take something from you. Stay, and you'll understand what it truly means to belong," the clown said with a grin, as if relishing their growing panic. Lily could barely think. She felt the claustrophobic weight of the carnival pressing down on her, closing her in, and the laughter, always the laughter, seemed to echo louder, now joined by the sounds of distant music, as if the whole place were mocking her, drawing her in. She looked at Matt, who was now visibly shaking, and at Sophie, whose face had drained of color. "Run," Lily whispered, her voice barely audible. "We need to get out of here." Without another word, the three of them turned and bolted down the path. But the fog seemed to close in even tighter. The world around them blurred, the ground shifting beneath their feet as the carnival seemed to stretch, elongate, and twist. It felt as if the very fabric of the town had disappeared, and all that remained was this cursed place. They ran blindly, their footsteps frantic, their breathing ragged, but every turn they made seemed to lead them right back to the center of the carnival, to the towering Ferris wheel, its rusted frame looming over them like a skeletal giant. The laughter followed them, deafening now, and the clown's voice, sweet and venomous, echoed in their ears. "You'll never escape," it said, from the shadows, from every direction, from the very air itself.